Watching the Bharat Progress Report 2025 on Newsx, where we are tracking 101 milestones that were achieved by Bharat, by India in 2025 that all add up to the puzzle piece to mission Viksit Bharat 2047. We've gone through the category of the economy and the industry. Now let's look at the category of people's welfare. Point number 21 on your screens, perhaps the most notable landmark change: goods and services tax GST slabs that were not only revised in terms of their toto at 0, 5, 18 and 40%, but the categorizations of various things within them have changed, so much so that from the food that you put on the table to the car you might buy, all became significantly cheaper just on the tax component alone from September 2025 onwards. That has a bearing pretty much on every single human being in this country, because we all pay GST on everything that we buy. It requires a conversation. Let's have it. Professor Nalpat with us, Ajay Dua with us, Joyita with us as well. Professor Nalpat, GST, I mean, that's one for the history books.
Well, there's no question that GST is a revolutionary change, and Prime Minister Modi succeeded in bringing it about, and now he's got GST 2.0, and in my view, before Modi 3.0 comes to a close, you'll have GST 3.0 and 4.0, because it's a remarkable tax. It affects so many items of consumption, and I think it has been further simplified, and I think more simplification will come. The fact is, Rishabh, that no government in history, and I stress history, has ever done so much for the disadvantaged as this government has. More than 800 million people are on one government welfare scheme or the other, whether it is food, whether it is other requisites of a good, happy, healthy life. And I would think this is a number unparalleled in human history. So the Modi government can be proud of itself in the huge number of achievements to its credit.
Yeah, so we are going to take a few of them one by one. I just want to touch upon the GST because that was the big ticket one, affects every single individual. Ajay Dua, quickly on the GST, we are seeing the impacts now. We saw the buzz that happened in the bazaars in September. How many people, I mean, literally you and me are rethinking what we are purchasing because prices have become cheaper.
Certainly. I think GST has been a major reform of the year, and it was long overdue, I would say. In fact, that came out that the Prime Minister was very eager to have that brought in, was from the Finance Minister itself when she mentioned while announcing these changes that Prime Minister had often asked her during the year, saying, when are you bringing about the changes in GST? I would consider it remarkable for 2 or 3 reasons. One, its contents, that the simplification was made easier to comply. Secondly, the number of slabs which was bothering quite a few persons, those were rationalized. And third, the overall impact of the GST was the incidence, as they call it in case of taxation, that was certainly lowered, which we saw during the festive season. Only a couple of weeks or 3 weeks of it were left because it came into force on the 22nd of September, and till at the festivals last till about the mid-October. But the changes which have been made had to be done in consultation with the state governments. The fact that there was a consensus in bringing about all these changes, I think kudos to the government.
Yeah, it's a big ticket win. Okay. Let me get Joyita's thoughts on this. Joyita, GST, I mean, literally everything that you and I are buying or thinking of buying, from white goods to automobiles, they became substantially cheaper. I mean, it became tempting to think slightly differently. That was a real impact that all of us felt.
Yes, absolutely, Rishabh. When you look at the GST, I mean, Diwali sales, I mean, they were record sales, I think, going over a decade. I think it was 5.4 lakh crore. Okay, and that is, and this, of course, has to be looked at in the background, geopolitically, what happened with that 50% tariff that Donald Trump had given India. So it was expected that it is going to impact the Indian economy. I mean, that was the buzz internationally in a very big way, and it was a punitive measure, and Donald Trump had given it to punish India. So I think it was very timely. That prod was needed at that particular point of time. As Professor Nalapat also said, as Dr. Ajay Dua is also saying, you see, I mean, while more rationalization is needed, while this rationalization could have happened earlier, but the very fact that it happened at that particular point of time, the government took up the challenge and kind of that it did it. It's important, and now we are seeing the effect in terms of Indian economic growth has not slowed down. I think that is the biggest takeaway from this GST reform.
Okay, it was nearer 6 lakh crores. If you're watching this abroad, that's $70 billion. 25% year on year jump. Highest ever festival retail sales happened in India. Highest ever. 1/4 jump from last year. And I think the impact of that on the GDP is probably being felt in the 8.2 figures we've got so far, but it's probably yet to be felt. Okay, but we're discussing people's welfare. Now let's get into the rub of it. Point number 22 on your screens. There's something called the PM SVANidhi scheme. It was launched a few years ago. This year, for street vendors, rediwalas, 15,191 crores of loans were dispersed. Now think about a person who has no asset but requires working capital. Ajay Dua.
Such moves as were put into motion certainly had been warranted. In India, as we all know, that the informal sector it is much larger than the formal, and the rediwalas, hawkers, the people who go from door to door, all those numbers are humongous. The two things have happened for them. One, the labor code, which was recently announced, the four labor codes, recognize their existence, and the fact that social security is going to be made available to them. That is a very big measure that the government recognizes their presence. They are being no longer treated as pariahs or illegal. In a number of cities in the country, such people, unless you are licensed, etc., and because shops require what's called the Shop and Establishment Act permission, but these people do not, and so they used to be scared of their wares being taken away by the municipal staff and other trucks coming, other people saying, why are you hawking here? So that's, I think, a thing behind us. Second is what you mentioned, the loans given to them under the Samriddhi PM Samriddhi funds is again something which only an institutional arrangement could have fulfilled in order to get them away from moneylenders who would lend at onerous terms.
Yes.
Instead, now we have
it is simplicity. It's simplicity itself. Yeah. It's a scheme is so simple. You need to have stuff. If you are running a Maggie shop, you need to buy the Maggie and the vegetables to start your shop.
Absolutely.
If you don't have the funds, you can't get it from a bank. You go to a money lender who will charge you per day interest. It's per day. Sometimes 1% per day. All the government did was that, okay, we will provide the interest component. So the cost to the exchequer has only been 140 crore rupees. And think about how many people have benefited on this. 46 lakh loans have been dispersed, and 40% of them have already been paid back. So it starts with a small loan, 10,000 rupees. You pay it back, you get a slightly larger loan. Professor Nalapat, for the person who wants to be that pakoda wala, the chai wala as we call it, this becomes a game changer. No money lender no longer required.
Because he's a chai wala, he understands the pain of the common man or a common Indian citizen. And may I say, Rishabh, you go on 100 miles, any trip, south, north, east, west, you will see the change. Kirana stores are now carrying much fancier items. There's a lot more buying. There's a lot more interest in what's happening around us. There's a lot more job opportunities. A lot of that is accessed online. So I'd like to say, Rishabh, just travel 100 miles from one part of India to another, and the change is visible, and that change is what Narendra Modi has wrought. Thank you.
Here's another one. Let's pick this up. The next point on your screens, number 23, tap water, which means that your pipe comes to your house, you open a nalka and you can fill your bucket with it, has now reached 81.42% Indian rural households. Less than 10 years ago, in rural households, mostly the women folk were on average having to walk 5 kilometers per day just for water. If you do the trip, you're talking about 3 to 4 hours per day per household being spent just to fetch water. We are nearly at saturation, not at saturation, but nearing saturation. Joyita Basu, just a simple thing can literally be life changing. You and I cannot imagine this situation. In the worst comes when people get so hassled when a water tanker has to be bought, we take it for granted, but it's a life changer.
Absolutely, Rishabh. And that is one of the things that one has to, you see, that is one of the things that one has to remember when it comes to Mr. Modi's government, that women empowerment. And when we are talking about women empowerment, it starts, it's like, it is not just about water. I mean, it starts from, say, for example, firewood. How should it all depends on safety of women, because it is water not just about that physical labor, but also the hazardous trip to maybe the forest to collect firewood, maybe to the trip to the well, which is 5 kilometers away or 10 kilometers away, to collect water. So all these things, everything is involved: health, safety, security. So all these things are involved in this, and that is what he has been taking up step by step. It started with Ujjwala, then it went on to Pakka Ghar, that now it has gone on to, health, of course, Ayushman Yojana. The water was picked up relatively late compared to the other schemes that had started. But water, it is very important, and it is sad that it took all these years for a prime minister or for a government to ensure that tap water becomes, it's such an important part of everybody's life.
Okay, so hopefully within a year or two, we are in saturation, that every single household has a tap with tap water. Supplying it with water, other challenges, maintenance, then come after that. But there are households who have never seen a tap. They don't know what a tap looks like in this country. That has to fundamentally change. Glad to see it is changing. Another milestone that was hit in 2025. Let me pick up point number 24, because this is an important one. There are about 60 million Indians above the age of 70. In 2025, 8.6 million of them received something called the Ayushman Vay Vandana health insurance card. Ajay Dua, the primary concern for a person who becomes over 70, primary in many cases expense for a person, becomes health related matters. And the private insurance sector generally stays away from people after a certain age. So providing for the social security of India's elderly is about providing health insurance. Now 15% of those who qualify have received it this year. What do you make of it?
Again, a very creditable achievement. I would say that the number, in fact, is larger, because people who are already covered, for instance, the central government employees above the age of 70, and as you know, with longevity having gone up, there are people who were earlier, say, didn't have this span of life. They are not being counted because they happen to be already under an insurance scheme funded by the central government. Similarly, there is an armed forces scheme which covers the entire set of army personnel, generals to soldiers, who have their separate armed forces insurance scheme. They are also not covered. So the number may be very large, as you said, but the percentage, if you count these people, is much larger than the 15% what was just mentioned. I'm saying this because there was earlier an impression that people could opt to move from one scheme to the other, come to the Ayushman Bharat scheme insurance in case they want it, but later, and rightly so, it was decided that if you are already insured under a government scheme, you stay in that group, a group insurance, you stay there, and we are really making this available
Yes.
to the people who are uncovered. I would say going forward, this scheme would actually be the revolutionary one for the elderly in the country. If it is backed up, and that is where the question arises, is backed up by actual physical amenities which these insurers
Fair enough.
would
Yes.
get. That means lots of dispensaries, lots of hospitals, may not be the secondary, really the tertiary ones,
Yes.
but certainly the secondary kind of hospitals, and spread out across the length and breadth
Okay,
of
just
the
hold
country.
your thought, because I want to take a point number 25. Now, this is something not many people maybe watching this broadcast would have heard of, but look at the scale of this. So, there's something called the e-Shram portal, which has been created. It has now had 30.98, that is 30.1 crore people who have signed up. These are unorganized, gig economy, labor, other workers who don't have a full-time job. That's 310 million people. Now, what does the e-Shram portal do? You log in using an Aadhaar based login. If you need access to social security schemes like we are discussing, pension, health, insurance, there is a dashboard that helps you with that. And it has something called the National Career Service. So, if a different person is hiring somebody with a particular skill set, they can access this National Career Service portal and offer you jobs. So, you connect workers who are looking for a job to the largest ever database that has ever been created in India of these workers, to potential people who are wanting to hire, and then provide them the social sector schemes that they are eligible for in the same place. 310 million people, Professor Nalapat, are now part of this database, and therefore part of opportunities in a centralized location.
Oh, look, I would simply like to point out, going to Joyita's point about women, the fact of the matter is that women are absolutely central in the prosperity and good health of a household. You have a woman who's reasonably well educated, you have a healthier household, a happier household. So I can tell you that's an important point. And very, very honestly, I mean, the number of fields in which this government has created a history is too large to enumerate, but you've done a fairly good job of mentioning some of the main milestones.
Okay.
I simply want to say that as far as India is concerned, it is definitely very much now taken off, and we're headed in by 2047 to the status of a prosperous country. Thank you.
Fingers crossed. Let me just take a point number 26 and point number 27. 26 first, which is the next one. Now, this has happened recently. This is the VB G scheme, which is an evolution of MNREGA. Now, what is fundamentally changed is that instead of 100 days of wage employment for rural households, you now get 125 days, so 25% more. And secondly, that this is not just wage labor, the labor will be utilized to improve the infrastructure of your local village or of your local area. So, this has happened, of course, recently in 2025. Point number 27 on your screens. This is not new, but a milestone has been achieved, and make a note of this. The PM Jan Dhan accounts, 55 crore accounts have now been opened with a cumulative deposited amount of 2.68 lakh crores. Ajay Dua, that's 550 million people who never had a bank account, with now in total, some more, some less, almost 3 lakh crore rupees deposited into the formal accounting system, which means you get interest on it, you can invest it, you can put it in a mutual fund, you can put it into a fixed deposit. I mean, the entire economic framework, the formal financial economic framework is now, there's no looking back. It's near saturation.
Indeed, the Jan Dhan scheme, I think, was revolutionary. There's no word short of it, for two reasons. One, you brought in a majority of the country into an institutional framework of borrowing and keeping money. But more important was that you created an avenue for the government schemes to directly reach out to them and not through a middleman. The direct transfer of benefits, which is in monetary terms or which could be monetized easily, the government ensured that it goes into the bank accounts, the DBT as we call it. And I think that vastly improved what was at one time mentioned by Mr. Rajiv Gandhi. I think he had talked about only 15 paisa out of a rupee actually reaching the projected or the planned beneficiary. That, I think, would have changed drastically. Now, but only by going around from house to house, enrolling people, bankers were moving around, other staff was engaged for it, and the initial 500 rupees or 1,000 rupees, as was required, was also put in by the government. So I would think that that kind of a thing, let's not underplay it, because that has helped remove the poverty, utter poverty in the country, which was in double figures and above 20%, to barely 5.5%.
Just having an account, therefore you can do UPI, therefore you can receive DBT, therefore you can earn a little bit of interest on your money, therefore you can maybe start your first ever mutual fund investment, first ever SIP. Your likelihood of getting a loan, if you have a financial transaction history which is officially recorded, is better across the board. I'm not even talking about handouts, just to be part of the financial architecture, and it's better for the banks. The deposits might be smaller, but digitization means managing large numbers of deposits is no longer logistically, administratively difficult. So the deposits may be smaller, but look at this, 3 lakh crore rupees is a chunk of change for an economy, anybody's economy. Okay, let's take up point number 28 on our screens. One nation, one ration card. Now, in a new generation of maybe millennials, where ration, thankfully, is not the biggest concern, remember there is a percentage of the country, not a small percentage, 800 million people who qualify for the rations. Many of them still partake it, but 40% of them are not living in the area where their ration card is registered. Earlier, if you were from UP and happened to be working in Maharashtra or in Karnataka, or you're from the northeast happening to be working in Delhi, and if your domicile was your own town and village, there was nothing you could do. Now you can collect ration from any ration shop anywhere in the country. Joyita Basu, it's not the biggest of reforms, because digitally it should have been possible, but it is now possible. Not to suggest that everybody should be looking for ration shops, but the fact that you can, for migrant workers, this is a huge deal.
Yes, absolutely. Rishabh, that is the whole point behind the idea. Because you see, when the government is giving a certain section, and it's a huge section, by the way, these benefits, why shouldn't they be able to avail these things? And given that, movement of labor is such a big thing in India. I mean, look at two states, particularly UP and Bihar. Why just UP, Bihar? Look at Bengal. look at the kind of migration that happens from these particular states and these northern and eastern states. They are spreading all over the country. Okay, and it's but natural. Why should not they be eligible? Say, for example, this BPL card, for example, works wonders, and not just in for rations and all, for getting treatment also, that really helps. So I would say this one nation, one ration card idea, this concept is very good, but the problem sometimes happens is that the state governments create problems. Say, for example, that's happening even with when you were talking about Ayushman Yojana. I know for certain states are creating major problems. Even you don't have that in Delhi. So it has to be seen, there has to be perfect coordination between the states and the center, so that everybody can is eligible, and it's possible for those who are eligible
so the
to
last
avail
mile,
this
yes,
benefit.
is implementation.
Last mile,
Yes,
delivery.
but earlier, forget implementation. It simply wasn't possible. It just couldn't be done. So now it is possible, and of course, we'll have to now analyze to see whether the implementation is cent% or nearly cent%. But it is now possible. All states, all union territories, anybody from anywhere in the country can go to the nearest ration shop and get their ration dues from that shop by law, by policy. Okay, point number 29. Now, this is an interesting one, because when we talk about consumer inflation, retail inflation, wholesale inflation, here's an index that is tallied on the basis of preparing a home cooked vegetarian thali and a home cooked non-vegetarian thali. And the average rates have gone down by 13% year on year from last year. Professor Dua, it's an indicator. It's not the be all end all, but it's an indicator that while for some of us, maybe because our choices are, of products and quality, etc., how we are looking at is our feeling that food is becoming more expensive, overall our food prices to have a meal is reasonably stable.
Well, certainly, I would say that the very fact that the inflation rate in the country has come down is primarily attributable to the food cost coming down. One reason, of course, would be that certain amount of food is coming to them through what we just discussed, and Jyota described it so well, the ration. That itself limits the requirement for the farmer, for the consumer to go to access the market, but because it's come to him or her through the ration system. But on the whole, we have seen that agriculture production growing at 3% a year means there is more food available in the country. Another proof of it is we are exporting rice, various kinds of rice. Earlier it was only the basmati. The saying that it goes to the Middle East, it will go elsewhere. We have become an exporter of food, processed food as well as raw food. So let's recognize the fact that inflation for the average man still is hugely dependent upon roti, kapda and makan.
Okay.
That these three things constitute a major component of what really goes into the expenditure of the common man.
Okay.
And by addressing the issue of agriculture, making available more food,
Okay.
as well as making available edible oil, even if it has to be imported, the government has made sure.
Okay, I want to take last point. Okay, because skill development is we talk about it requires a lot of work, but there is something called the Pradhan Mantri Kaushal Vikas Yojana (PMKVY), which is meant for skill development. This year, it has expanded its categories of training into AI, robotics, and IoT, with 25 lakh young people being trained on this. Professor Nalapat, on skill development is not the easiest thing to quantifiably do, but obviously needs to get done, and expanding it to new era. What would you say to young people out there in terms of benefiting from skill development opportunities?
I would say to young people, don't worry about the tariff tantrums of Donald Trump. And of course, you are welcome to travel anyway. That's the glory of being a citizen of a democratic country. But the fact is, opportunities are right here and may not be even very far away. They may be at your doorstep. And I think, Rishabh, that's a very important change that has come about. In the past, they were very rare. You had very few places where the local people became founders of vast institutions. Manipal is one such. Today, you have several founders of big institutions, big companies who have not operated very far from where they were born. And I think that's a very important change that's come across the country. Frankly, Rishabh, India has changed, India has been transformed, and I think very honestly, that's something that all of us can take pride in. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, that is segment 3 of the People's Welfare category, points 21 to 30 of our 101 2025 milestones of the Bharat Progress Report. We take a break. Segment 4 coming up.